This ESPN podcast is brought to you by Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance. Visit geico.com.
The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects. The BS Report. The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. This is part 2. If you missed part 1 of our Monday extravaganza, Wesley Morris on the Oscars, check that out. The same way you got this one, here's part 2. Zach Lowe, right now. You just came back from the Sloan Conference. You hosted some panels. You did some networking. You talked about stuff. What was the number one conversation topic of the weekend?
Probably tanking, actually, against all odds. Tanking infiltrated the Sloan Conference, even though it's only sort of tangentially an analytics thing between Daryl Morey's comments and Brian Colangelo's comments and Mike Zarin's willingness to talk about his wheel proposal. That was the number one topic out of the ordinary topics, which are always, can the geeks talk to the jocks? Can we actually implement any of this analytics stuff? And Sport View, the cameras, all that always comes up. But this time there was a lot of tank talk. And Adam Silver's one-on-one with Malcolm Gladwell, which was contentious, by the way.
Was it?
Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell went at him, and it was interesting. There was a lot of burbling in the audience that Stern would have put the hammer down way earlier in the interview than Adam did, and obviously they're different personalities. But Malcolm Gladwell, you went at him partly out of just his personal dislike as a New Yorker for the Dolan family and some of the tax breaks that they get. But it was contentious, and the subject of tanking was brought up there as well.
That's interesting. I may or may not have helped Malcolm with a couple of those questions. One of the ones I wanted him to ask was about PEDs, which he did. And Adam basically said, we found that it doesn't really drift into our sport at all. Then the next day, they had the head of the U.S. doping agency came in. He was like, yeah, their testing is ridiculous. 6 times a year, anyone can beat that, blah, blah, blah. Did that have a ripple or no?
It had a little bit of a ripple. I feel like that. I think the sort of intelligent audience feels like we've sort of we've stalled on that question, right?
Right.
Like everyone knows we need HGH testing, or the NBA would like to have HGH testing, and sort of fortuitously for the league, we're now a year plus without an executive director of the union, and so the league can just keep on trotting out, well, we're waiting for the union, this stuff has to be collectively bargained. Sort of once that situation gets resolved, a lot of good stuff gets put back on the table. So I feel like everyone thinks we've already had this conversation about PEDs, and we're waiting to have the next part of the conversation.
Well, you made the key point. You said sort of fortuitously. I would go with full-fledged fortuitously, because not having a players' union head in there, it's been over years. Has it been 18 months yet? It's like getting close.
It hasn't been. It was at the All-Star game last year where they officially booted
right, but
Billy
he was,
Hunter. I mean, he was out.
Yeah,
he was out in sort of in an informal way at least before that. So yeah, it's
right,
almost
so
a year and a half.
They don't have to address it really at all until the new union head comes. But Chris Paul got elected president, and he said that somebody asked him about HGA. He was like, "Not on my watch." Basically, that's not happening. He threw that out there, and then it just kind of came and went. I got to say, I love everything Adam's done so far, especially the accountability with the officiating. And I think people are starting to find out he's a real basketball fan. He's got a real passion for the game. He's got a good personality. I was disappointed with his PED response, though, because I think he came off as naive. To say that it doesn't fit in with your game when, conditioning, recovery, being able to play for long stretches without getting tired are all things that PEDs help you do. And the transformation of the bodies from now, or from 40 years ago until now, I thought he came off as naive. I hope he reconsiders that. But the tanking thing, as you say, got some momentum. Don't you think part of that had to do with those Philly trades? And there's a real anger in the league about what Philly did with Indiana, don't you think?
Anger, I don't know. You're probably hearing from different people than
maybe
I am.
A little bit, slight hostility, maybe?
Maybe. I mean, it was long in coming, right? I mean, everyone knew Philadelphia was going to do trades like this eventually. So it didn't have the shock value. And there are people, on the flip side, smart people who think, this is what Philadelphia should do. And the smart guy NBA people, Philadelphia won the New Orleans trade, even though they got, the lesser present day asset. So there's the smart contingent, or a lot of the smart contingent thinks that Philadelphia is doing exactly what the NBA incentivizes them to do. They're just doing it more blatantly than perhaps any team. Well, I mean, look, Charlotte did this 2 seasons ago to get Anthony Davis. They were 7-59. They made no attempt to win games. But yeah, those trades, and then Stan Van Gundy on the panel I moderated just went at Philly with Sam Hinkie in the audience, of course.
Oh, wow.
He called him. I'd have to get to the exact quote, but he essentially said what Philly is doing with this roster is disgraceful. If he didn't use the word disgraceful, he used a synonym that was just as strong. I mean, he put the hammer down, which is easier for Stan to do. He's not in the league, and he's an opinionated guy to begin with. But there were a lot of reasons the tanking issue is coming to the forefront. The wheel proposal, what the Sixers are doing, Adam Silver is sort of being very open about considering changing the lottery. I think we're coming to sort of a broil on that.
I thought, we did our trade deadline back and forth, and right at the end of it, the Evan Turner trade happened. And, we were just sorting out the details as we were putting the column out. That trade was atrocious when you really look at it now. I mean, they gave Indiana 2, I think, valuable bench guys to save $500,000, and they got, a second-round pick out of it. Congratulations. I really wonder whether it's okay that whether it should be okay for a team that's out of the race to affect the playoff race like that. Because I remember, in the 80s, when the Lakers got Michael Thompson, they gave up a first-round pick and I think Frank Brakowski. And we went nuts when that happened. We were like, oh, my God, that's all it took to get Michael Thompson? And he had a direct impact on that playoff, and it was one of the reasons the Lakers won the title. This was to trade away those 2 guys. I know you're trying to sabotage your team to some degree, but just to get $500,000 of savings out of it, that's all you get, other than this second-round pick, which has got a 1 in 15 chance of making the team and having an impact. I don't know. That didn't seem right to me. You sound like you're more okay with it.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, they would have done a trade for a first-round pick if they could have gotten one earlier, later, before the deadline, after the deadline. They either couldn't get one or they misplayed their hand in some subtle way that we'll never really know. So it's not as if they sought that trade. They certainly saw better trades. To the second point, which is interesting about the bad teams helping the good teams, that gets into the fairness of the buyout system, too, because the same thing is happening there. Orlando letting Glenn Davis go, knowing full well there's a chance a contender is going to get him. Caron Butler, and I mean, these players may not be as impactful and certainly not as young as Evan Turner is. But Glenn Davis, in particular, considering the horrible backups that the Clippers had before him, I mean, that impacts the title race, too. And again, that's the same thing. That's a bad team surrendering a decent veteran asset. Although, honestly, you get Orlando on truth serum. I think they probably don't think Glenn Davis really mattered to them, and this is going to make them any worse or any better, really.
Yeah, that's smart to throw that in there. I would agree with that. I guess I was looking at that Orlando thing as they needed to get him out of there because they needed to give his minutes to somebody else.
Sure, and Philadelphia has D-League players that don't really need NBA minutes because the Sixers know they're not NBA players.
Well, and also, Glenn Davis wasn't really an asset at that salary. So even being able to buy him out for $700 this year and $800 next year, whatever they did, you could argue giving his minutes to other players and then using that money for whatever helps them. For Philly, I don't see any scenario where that trade helps them other than it helps them lose more. Even if they had kept Evan Turner as some sort of the 5% chance he's a sign and trade asset, and then on the other part of it, why not keep Danny Granger as a possible sign and trade asset this summer? What do you get out of buying him out? That's to me, that is just pure and simple Granger's agent saying, you buy him out, I'll make it up to you later. That seems like a wink, wink. I'll take care of you guys if you do this, which as we know over and over again in the NBA, the guys never actually take care of them. But I just don't see how, if you're a Philly fan, how you feel good about that trade.
Right, and you mentioned the possibility of a sign and trade. I mean, what I was going to say before is the other thing Philly gets out of is Evan Turner's free agency and the dangers that presents of whether Philly becomes a team that sort of throws its hands up in the air and pays him just to pay him and keep him as an asset, or lets him walk for nothing. But as you say, there's the middle ground where they can find another way to get something for him in a sign and trade. But it's certainly
even Granger. Granger might have. Who knows? Maybe Granger plays well for them for 2 months, and they can sign and trade him this summer.
But you're the captain of the Granger is shot campaign, right?
Yes, I am. That's the flaw in my argument. But I'm saying for them, it's like, wouldn't you pay $5? You're under the salary floor anyway. They're the last team that needed to save money. I'd rather have a veteran there who's trying to rebuild his career for 2 months and hope that he turns into a sign and trade asset and maybe takes Michael Carter-Williams under his wing. Like, that's the other part of what Philly's doing. They blew up their team and turned it into an absolute disgrace. They're going to lose every game possibly here. They might lose the last 36. And I don't see how that's good for Michael Carter-Williams. I already think he's worse than he was 2 months ago. I don't know how much Sixers you watch, but I always
too much Sixers.
Yeah, from a car crash mentality, I can't resist them sometimes. He's developing some really bad habits. And I don't like the body language doctor doesn't like his body language. There's a lot going on that I don't like with him. And to just put him on a D-League team doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, he's hit the rookie wall. He had 8 turnovers last night. Every time, you check a box score, it's 6 of 17 and just not looking good. And yeah, I've watched them a fair amount. I find them unwatchable right now. It's hard for me. It's like eating my vegetables now. When I see a Philly-Orlando game or something like that, it really is like eating cauliflower, basically.
At least Orlando feels like they are building towards some sort of identity. It's like, hey, we have some young players, and one more young player, we're getting there. Philly is... I really find it hard to believe that it wouldn't help Nerlens Noel to run around for 20 minutes a game, Like, that team's going to lose anyway. But it's something that, to bring it back to the Sloan Conference, this is something that the league has created. They have created a world where this Sixers team can exist. And I don't know whether we need less teams or stronger anti-tanking incentives or what. But this weekend was the first weekend. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. We ended up getting bumped because we were talking about how bad the Knicks are. But this was the first weekend I can remember with the NBA where I kind of knew who was going to win. You just look at the matches like, that team doesn't want to win. Oh, that team's going to lose that game. Even New Orleans right now, which I think is the sleeping giant of Tankapalooza because they have to get their top 5 pick or else they lose it. That team is all of a sudden playing Austin Rivers all the time. Austin Rivers is like their secret weapon for the last 2 months, right?
He's been playing okay, though. Also,
play
at
him
least
40
defensively.
minutes.
But they have no one. I mean, Holiday's hurt. Anderson's hurt. Tyreek Evans has been mostly not very good. Eric Gordon's okay. New Orleans does have an incentive, as you say, to get into the top 5. And honestly, I thought even 2 weeks ago, with the 4 horrible teams in the Eastern Conference, at the top of the tanking standings, plus Sacramento and the Lakers and the Jazz, I thought they never would have had a chance, but they're playing very badly, and the Knicks in the Eastern Conference just are dead and lose every single game. And the Hawks are too far above them. But the point is, it's not like insane anymore to suggest that New Orleans might be able to get there. I don't think they want to get there. They say all the right things privately about we want to have a winning culture. And Monty Williams, it's like Brad Stevens in Boston. They have a coach that's never going to try and lose a game on purpose. But, they're not very good, and they're losing a lot of games.
There's one more like that, too, which I realized last night watching Utah almost beat Indiana. Ty Corbin doesn't have an incentive to tank because he's getting fired at the end of the year. That team he's at least trying to win all of these games. I think the Celtics are trying to win. Although there was a suspicious, I did the Lakers-Celtics game a few weeks, 2 Fridays ago, and there was a suspicious moment when the Lakers started making a run, and it was so clear the Celtics needed to call a timeout, and Stevens just kind of let it happen. I was like, I wonder if this is like a secret under-the-radar tanking moment right now. But
yeah, you got to be careful.
We
all
say
have
it,
to be
but,
careful.
Yeah, but it was just like, wow, this is weird. He's not calling timeout. They're just blowing this lead, and Marshawn Brooks is suddenly unstoppable. And like you would think at least a 20 to talk about it. But I think there's certain teams now that I just feel like have thrown it in. And I'm putting New Orleans on the list. I think this weekend they made the decision internally, like, oh my God, like we can't give Philly the 7th pick. This now becomes the worst trade of the last 10 years. We have to at least try to get in the top 5.
And that's the downside, though. You try and fail, and you've got the absolute worst possible outcome where you give them 6 or 7. And you hoped before the season you would give them 13, 14, or even 15 if you got lucky and got in the playoffs. That trade, Philly is going to end up winning that trade. I mean, everyone who said that they won that trade is going to end up being right. It's just the degree to which New Orleans was sort of mocked as having been bamboozled in that trade, I think was overstated, but also says a lot about, again, how the NBA incentivizes teams. And by the way, I've never been a big tanking fanatic guy. I don't see a giant problem with it. I don't see a huge distinction between tanking and September call-ups in Major League Baseball. But once in a while, Sixers this year, Bobcats a couple of years ago, the ML Car Celtics, the Rockets in 1984 to get Hakeem, the whole thing. Once in a while, you get an example that is just egregious. And sometimes it's tanking for playoff seeds. We've seen that, too. We'll see that maybe in the last 2 or 3 games of the season. Teams doing ridiculous things, holding out players to position themselves in the seeds they want to get.
It's going to be interesting to see the reverse of that possibly with Miami and Indiana. I think there was an alternate universe where Miami maybe would have been, all right, you know what, let's just grab number 2. Let's make sure we're 100% healthy going into the playoffs. Like, let's not kill ourselves here to try to catch Indiana. But now it's like with the way the Bulls are playing, I think the Bulls probably lose to either of those teams. But now that there's a round 2 war looming against the number 3 seed potentially. And you couldn't have said that 2 months ago. I don't want to play the Bulls in the playoffs if I'm Miami or Indiana. I just don't. I'll probably win, but I don't want to go through that and then have to play, the other of Miami, Indiana, and then have to go into the finals. Like, that is a brutal 6 weeks, don't you think?
Now all of a sudden it's going to be a brutal 6 weeks.
Well, the Bulls have changed the game, I think.
No, I agree. And I may write more about this week, but I'll say this right now. Chicago right now is the best story in the NBA. Phoenix has been the best sort of season-long story. Chicago, the last 3 weeks or a month, has just been straight up inspirational to watch. And I think, Miami, Chicago, if it happened again this year, I think would look a lot like last year's playoff series where Chicago gets a game and plays them tough and ends up losing in 5 just because they don't have the horses to score. Indiana, Chicago might be a little more interesting because Indiana's got 2 stinkers in them offensively in a 7-game series, and maybe it's a longer series for that reason. I don't think they have a shot to beat either of those teams, but Chicago, they were the talk of the Sloan Conference too, and just in terms of the hallway conversations. They beat Dallas while we were there. They destroyed the Knicks either the day before we left there, while we were up there. Yesterday they destroyed the Knicks. And everyone's talking about them and just saying the phrase you hear over and over again is they make you earn it. They are not going to beat themselves. You're going to have to go out there and beat them in a nasty defensive game. And everyone is just beyond impressed with them.
Van Gundy, during the Knicks game yesterday, was saying how he thought they had a much better chance of beating Indiana. And then Doug Collins said the same on our show. And now you're saying it. The one X factor with Miami to me is to me, Wade is just the shadow looming over everything. And he's looked better lately. But
he's been great. Since the All-Star break, he's been the old Wade. He's
looked like the old Wade. But we've seen that come and go, And you can catch Miami on the wrong week, for them. Where, Wade tweaked his knee again, or Wade did this. And I feel like against a 60% Wade, especially if Battier, he's looked better since the All-Star break. Definitely. Some rest has helped some of these older guys. But if Battier tails off again and just, it turns into one of those things where LeBron has to do everything in this series, I think Chicago could go 6 or 7 maybe. I agree with you, though, that I think Indiana, the capacity to just have those 2 69-point games, where they lose 88-69 and 82-71, makes them a little bit more of a threat. Plus, Paul George hasn't really. Remember when he was the number 3 MVP? Those days are over.
Yeah. Well, he still would be up there. I mean, I haven't thought super hard about the specific order of my MVP, but look, I wrote this when I wrote my giant Paul George feature which was largely laudatory, but he was he was shooting 55% from mid range.
Yeah.
When he was number 3 on everyone's MVP ballot, and that was never going to continue. And he's regressed predictably, but he's still very good. He's mostly been steady. He had a down month here and there, but he's still one of the 10 best defensive players in the league and a steady offensive force. I mean, he's in contention for an MVP ballot spot, but you're right. The sort of sizzling 25 a game on 10 of 19 shooting Paul George has not been around. And by the way, Hibbert's last 6 weeks have been discouraging as on both ends. I mean, he's still a great defensive player even when he's down, but he hasn't been the same force.
Pretty hard for a 7'2" guy to shoot 40% for 6 weeks. That's not great.
It's not easy. Byron Mullins is impressed with as a 7-footer who strives for that. He's very impressed.
I said on TV yesterday, if I had to fill out the ballot right now, Blake Griffin is my number 3. And I
saw that. And Doug agreed with you.
I think he's 3, and I'd have to probably put Joakim Noah 4, because this Bulls team was headed for the lottery after that Dang trade. And I think Noah and Tibbs as a combo just said, no, it's not happening. We're not allowing this to happen. And then they lucked out with DJ Augustine, obviously. Taj Gibson? Did you see this coming with Taj Gibson?
Taj Gibson, not to spoil my end-of-season column, which can obviously change the end-of-season awards column, but he's the 6th man of the year right now.
No question.
And Noah absolutely deserves consideration for a top 5 MVP ballot spot. I mean, obviously he's not going to win it. He's probably not going to crack the top 5, but he has to be in the discussion for spots 4 and 5 and down on anyone's ballot. The guy has been, I mean, he's averaging like 7 assists a game in the last month. It's insane how good the guy's been.
It's interesting how they've revolved their offense more around his passing. It makes you think, like, could he have done this the last couple of years with Rose, but Rose is just so ball dominant that maybe, almost Rose had to go away to kind of see this side of Noah in full bloom. But I think he's the first team All-NBA center, not even a debate right now. I mean, that might change. He has a tendency of, he plays so hard, he always has a tendency of something will happen to his body at some point, So you just have to keep that in the back of your mind. But
I'm trying to think, by the way, of other good number 3 MVP
it's
candidates.
grim.
I mean,
we talked about it in the meeting yesterday. Like, it's Dragic is kind of in the mix. Crazy.
That's exactly the name I was about to say, because some people would tell you Chris Paul has been so good that despite what has he missed 19 games? Despite that, he should still be in the conversation. Kevin Love, you can't forget about Kevin Love, even though Minnesota has been a disaster in close games and is not going to make the playoffs.
He's a DH. Him and Harden are guys who play one end of the floor for me. I just, if I'm seriously considering you as an MVP candidate, I need 2A.
Well, then what about Dwight? 19th. And by the way, a lot of these guys, obviously PER cannot be everything, but it's a good individual wrap-up stat. Dwight's 19th in PER. LaMarcus Aldridge is 17th. These guys are some of the candidates in the conversation for that 3 spot. Paul George has fallen to 23rd, which is still outstanding, but not what we'd normally guess for, a top 3, top 4 ballot guy. Steph Curry. Steph Curry is the name we haven't mentioned. Steph Curry should definitely be in consideration for that. Their offense without Steph Curry might as well be, 5 Grantland staffers trying to score points in the NBA.
Yeah, I have him or Dragic would be battling 5 for me.
Sacrilege. Sacrilege. The name that has not come up yet is Dirk. How about Dirk?
Oh, he's on there for me. Yeah.
Dirk. Okay, good.
How about what are they, a 5 or a 6 seed right now? They're on pace for 50 wins, and I cannot figure it out for the life of me.
They are right now 8th, which is remarkable.
They dropped.
They're like 12-3, I think. Or maybe actually they've lost 2 straight now to Chicago and the Spurs. So I think they're like 12, whatever they are. It's
That's
like
12-4
in their last 16 games, and they've moved up 0 spots in the playoff race. It's just brutal.
They're on pace for 50 wins. Yeah, if you look at Curry's stats this year versus Derrick Rose's MVP year, pretty much dead even. I mean, Rose will average like 1 more point a game, and Curry's better with threes by a wide margin. But other than that, It's pretty much right there. And so Curry should be in the mix. It's just that Golden State team's been so perennially disappointing week after week after week. I would say that's the only team that's underachieved out of those top 9 in the West, in my personal opinion. The only one I just feel like, man, they have more talent than this record.
If Memphis had been healthy all season, 33 and 25 would be underachieving, but considering who they've been missing, they're fine.
Right. Warriors, though, they just got spanked by the Bulls the other night. You know, they've had a lot of those games where you're just like, oh, what's going on with this team?
I was giving some of their front office guys a little crap about that game because that was the game. That was the game, by the way, you call me Spock. I unleashed a romantic Twitter love letter to the Bulls after that game. It was like 4 straight tweets of inspirational Bulls talk because that was a game, though, where the Warriors fancy themselves a championship contender.
Nope.
And they need to win every game. I mean, they're in the fight of their lives just to make the playoffs. The Bulls announced within the first 15 minutes of that game, we are here to kick your ass, and you're going to have to fight us to win this game. And Golden State just decided, you know what, we got a lot of other games left. Let's just pack it in. They wanted absolutely no part of the Bulls in that game.
Yeah, we talked about them on Friday because we had them against the Knicks. And the thing that jumped out when I was kind of studying and preparing for the segment was the guys on the Warriors who are playing below where they should be playing, right? Like, I thought Klay Thompson would be better this year. Stats, fine. Like, you look at his stats, and you can spin his season that it's been successful, but he was really supposed to make a leap for them this year, and he really didn't totally do it, you know? And Harrison Barnes, just as a bench guy, just clearly not comfortable, doesn't work for him, you know? And their bench, the fact that they're relying on Jermaine O'Neal this much, coming off the bench, we know how the Jermaine O'Neal play plays out. We know what's going to happen. He's going to get hurt. You know,
right,
and then what happens?
We know what's going to happen right until he loses his passport on the way to Toronto.
Right. He got hurt as he was looking for his passport. But, they're a really disappointing team for me. And I'm starting to get worried they're not going to make the playoffs. I kept waiting for Phoenix to drop out. But if Dragic keeps going to another level, that all-star snubbing, you hate the word snub, but that was probably the best thing that happened to his season. It unleashed him. He was already playing great. Now he's a dominant guard and is just winning games by himself. You mentioned Chris Paul. I got to say, here's a case, swinging it back to Sloan a little, where I feel like the stats have been a little deceiving, especially like the assist-turnover stuff. Because I'm going to these games, or at least most of them. And to me, he has not been the same since he went out. I don't feel the same guy. I went to the Houston game on Wednesday night. Beverly spent 4 quarters trying to get into a fight with him, challenging him, bothering him, bugging him. Chris really didn't want any part of it. And I've seen him do that a couple times this year. I don't know whether he's pacing himself for the postseason or his body hurts or what's going on, but I feel like he's opting for efficiency over I'm going to kick everybody's ass. And the fact that the Clippers look better, or not better, but they didn't really miss him that much, I thought was interesting. I thought it was interesting that Blake and DeAndre played harder and kind of took ownership of the team when he wasn't there. Do you read anything into that or no?
I actually like the way they've looked since CP3 has come back, and he's looked good to me. He has a history of pacing himself for the playoffs. He did it in New Orleans and then would unleash holy hell.
I'm fine with that, by the way.
Right, and so I'm not, I think he gets the benefit of the doubt, but he's been good since he's come back. He's shooting well. He's dishing assists like crazy. And I think what's been healthy for them is, as you say, Blake especially made a giant leap when Paul was out. The schedule wasn't super difficult over those 20 games, but whatever. The schedule is what it is in the NBA, and they had some good teams and some bad teams, more bad than good. But you see now that Paul is back that Blake still has the freedom to rebound and push the ball on his own and look for shooters. So I think the Clippers are in the early stages, but doing a good job of saying, okay, we found something here. We found a more versatile player than even we thought with Blake. Let's not neuter that now that the point guard is back. And I think they're going to handle that well. It's just, he's looked good when I've seen him. And even in that Rockets game, I thought he looked good. Patrick Beverley has a habit of just being a pain in the ass.
Can we give Patrick Beverley a nickname? I was thinking Pitbull.
Pitbull, I think exists. I think people have referred to him as that.
The Rottweiler. We need something. Mad Dog. I was thinking like Fred Mad Dog Carter was one of Doug Collins' teammates. We were talking about what a great nickname that was. And maybe Beverly needs to be Mad Dog. But he is like right out of the Riley Knicks, Bad Boy Pistons era. I'm telling you, that whole game he wanted to get in a fight with Chris Paul. He finally fouled out on a cheap foul after they had lost. And then Chris Paul made believe he took it personally, started walking to him, then wasn't going to get involved. And Beverly walked by and just tried to hit the ball out of his hands. Like, he's just, I don't think there's anybody quite like him in the league right now. And I got to be honest, like, the Rockets need that toughness that he has. Not the toughest team, you know? He's like single-handedly giving them that edge, I don't know, I kind of like the Rockets. Is it wrong to like the Rockets?
No.
Okay.
Well, first of all, we were exchanging Beverly emails last week and trying to compare him to players, and I threw out Avery Bradley as the only sort of full court press kind of guard that compares. I think you said Beverly is like Avery Bradley on Red Bull and five somethings. I don't remember what the five things were. 5 lines of Coke, 5 shots of tequila. I have no idea what it was, but I like the comparison. No, I think the best story in the Western Conference in the last month has been the Clippers and the Rockets really seem to be getting it together and making it not just a 2-team conversation at the top. And Portland has been up and down, and LaMarcus has been in and out of the lineup. They have injuries, but they've hung in. I mean, that conference is just insane, and it looks better at the top now with Houston and the Clippers than it did 6 weeks ago.
The Clips, there's a flaw that I feel like Redick is out for the year. And I feel like they know this and they're not saying it. I think if I had to bet Redick comes back, Redick doesn't come back, I would bet that he doesn't come back. I think he's seriously hurt.
You are not the only one that thinks that. I am not as plugged into that situation as I probably should be, but there is a lot of concern about Redick.
I'm pretty plugged in.
That he may not come back, or if he does, he may be one of those things like it's game 3 of the first round. Let's have Redick give it a go.
I would even say game 3 of the conference finals under that scenario.
If they get there.
If they get there. And the problem with them, and the Rockets did this the other night, and they basically were like, hey, you're going to have to play 2 of Matt Barnes, Darren Collison, and Jared Dudley. Those guys are going to have to beat us. So good luck. And what happened is Doc very smartly put Collison out there because James Harden had to guard him. McHale never kind of changed his mind on he should have had 2 point guards out there, and he kept Harden on Collison. And Collison just won the game for the Clippers. He scored 3 straight baskets. But I just worry about that in the playoffs. I just feel like sometimes these playoff series, especially like in the West, that's going to be a slugfest. These playoff series come down to, Jared Dudley's open with 70 seconds left and they're down 2, and he's got to make this 3. And I don't trust him. I don't trust Barnes either. I don't trust Collison. I don't trust any of these guys. They needed Redick, and I don't know if they're going to bounce back from that one. The good news for them is they have 2 of the best 11 players in the league, right?
Yeah, that's a nice place to start.
That's a nice place. And DeAndre, I got to say, Doc is a Coach of the Year candidate for me just for what he's done for DeAndre and Blake. Like, to tap into those guys and get them playing the way they've played. DeAndre's been 15 rebounds a game now for 2 months. That's like not a joke. 15 rebounds a game.
He's gotten better defensively. He's
better.
Still
he's not great.
He's still not as good as the Clippers say he is, but he's gotten better. Doc loses Coach of the Year points for using the words Bill Russell and DeAndre Jordan in the same sentence.
Penalized.
He might actually get disqualified from Coach of the Year
DQ.
for that.
I'm okay with that.
Can we take it easy, please? My God.
Yeah. When Dwight Howard is doing spin moves on you with impunity, you're not the Defensive Player of the Year. Dwight Howard's like, give me the ball, I could score on DeAndre. That's trouble. But the Rockets, they have 2 issues. The Ashik thing, he just looks miserable. It's worse in person than it is on TV. He just looks like he's like somebody has a gun trained on him at all times in case he's going to try to run out of the arena. Is his body language. And then Jeremy Lin, on paper it makes sense. You bring him off the bench. He's your 6th man, right? He's your instant offense, and I get it. It just hasn't worked. And if he can't adjust to that role, they're in real trouble because they don't get any bench scoring, basically. Harden's defense is a whole other, that's just as a basketball fan, somebody who just cares and who feels like he should be one of the best 10 players in the league. His lack of passion for defense is really disturbing. He's not Kobe. You're not 34-year-old Kobe who's won 5 titles. Like, you don't get to play defense like that when you haven't even done anything yet.
Okay, so I have been hitting Harden's defense all year, actually for multiple years.
Is this the low post stat?
No. He's been. There have been games where he has been an embarrassment. And I don't use that word lightly. That's an insult, and there have been games when he's deserved it. I feel like lately he's been trying harder. I think they're trying to say, okay, if you're going to be a disaster off the ball and allow backdoor cuts and not pay attention, let's see how you do on the ball. And in at least a few games I've seen, he's risen to the challenge. As far as Ashik goes, look, he's unhappy. Everyone knows he's unhappy. But, here's the silver lining to this. It's not bad to have a really good backup center. There are going to be games where Dwight's going to get in foul trouble. Maybe he'll tweak an ankle one game. And even if he doesn't, it's nice to have a guy who can come in and play 15 minutes of really good center defense, and so you're guaranteed 48 minutes of that. And again, Ashik is miserable. He doesn't want to be on the team, but I do feel like he's playing hard, and he's never not played hard. He might not look happy, but I think this, we always look at an overabundance of players at one position and say, well, the team has to make a trade. And there's truth to that. In the long run, it's better to sort of balance out your roster. But in the short run, it's not terrible to have insurance at a very important position. Of all the things you just mentioned that are bad about Houston, the one that is bad to me more than the others of late is that Lin has looked not good off the bench for the last couple of weeks, and they need him to be better.
Well, and on top of that, they have real issues with Beverly is a really good defensive player. But when you're talking about Harden and Parsons and people like that, if they're in the wrong series against the wrong perimeter guys, they're just going to get lit up, and that they need to. It's also an effort thing. Like, James Harden's your best player, him and Howard are your franchises. When your best player is mailing in possessions and quarters on one end of the floor, I just think that's compared to what we're watching in Chicago right now, or compared to Durant and LeBron every night. Like, if you're going to call yourself a superstar and the best 2 guard in the league, you can't do that. The one thing, I was watching that Rockets-Clippers game really carefully. I took my son, who's now great to go to games with. He just zones out, and he loves it, and he goes nuts, and he roots for Blake dunks and all that. So I could actually watch the game. And, I think those 2 teams are probably going to end up in a playoff series, right? Don't we think that's going to be the 4-5 in some order unless Portland really falls for some reason?
I would say they're more likely to be 3-4.
You think so? You think Portland drops?
Portland's up in the loss column on each of them and has been playing well lately. And now Aldridge is back, so it's certainly possible that's 4 or 5. I'd almost rather see both of them advance around instead of one eliminating the other.
To knock one out.
Yeah, if that's 4 or 5, that is a bloodbath.
Well, so I was watching it, and Houston did one really interesting thing in the second half. They played Howard and Ashik together.
Yeah, for a few minutes.
It didn't work in the first month of the season. They abandoned it. But it worked against the Clippers because they put Ashik on Blake. Blake had a lot of trouble against Ashik. Ashik's really hard to score against, especially the way the Clippers use Blake, where they just kind of dump it to him and he has to create stuff. And I wondered, if they're in a playoff series, I wonder if Houston's going to start using that lineup with Howard and Ashik together. I think the Clippers would have a lot of problems against that lineup.
Well, I think you mentioned before the playoffs is just a different beast.
Yeah,
and you were talking about the Clippers having to play, let's say 2 of the Collison, Jamal Crawford, Matt Barnes duo, or not Jared Dudley trio.
Yep.
a little bit too much, and that is not necessarily a problem in the regular season, but in the playoffs, you can't hide guys. Like, teams that have depth are going to find your weak spot, and they're going to pick at it and pick at it and pick at it. Even if they have to do things like, okay, Klay Thompson might not be a great post-up player, but if you're hiding Tony Parker on him, he becomes a very effective post-up player. And I think that's the kind of thing that is more prevalent in the playoffs. And Clippers Houston, even in my big, stop saying dumb things about Blake Griffin posts when I wrote about how well he's been playing, particularly as a post-up scorer, he has a much better post-up game than people have ever given him credit for. He does struggle because he's not tall and he's not long.
Size.
he does struggle. And look, it's obvious. Like, most guys would struggle against defenders who are big and strong and quick. But Blake doesn't have a counter, like a plan B for that, other than going out and shooting jumpers and facing up and dribble driving by them, which are effective. But, like, in that Houston game, it was back to, like, wild Blake in the post, flinging up impossible shots over bigger guys. And I remember talking to Kelvin Sampson earlier in the season about Houston and about that double big lineup and thinking and saying to him, do you feel like you gave up on this like a little quick? It's been 10 games and it's already like an unplayable disaster. And he said, it wouldn't shock me if, and he said it on the record, I just didn't print it at the time. So it wouldn't shock me if we brought it back selectively. And that's one of the matchups where you're right. I think, for 5 minutes here or there, if Blake's on fire against Terrence Jones, who can't guard big fours, maybe you throw it out there.
And I think from the Clippers side, the Big Baby buyout was so huge, and just them getting him. I think Rangers shot. I think it was worth a shot for them to try it because they need the shooting if he can ever get his legs back. But Big Baby's going to have a dramatic impact on that team. I know he wasn't playing that great in Orlando, but the guy's been in wars, and he's played in Game 7s. He's played in Game 7 of the Finals. He played 20 minutes. He played.
He'll throw a computer keyboard if you piss him off.
Yeah,
he's been in wars at the Econo Lodge.
That's true. He's been in hotel wars. But he's big. He's a monkey wrench. He comes into the game, bodies start flying around. He's setting picks. He's knocking guys over. And the other thing is he knows where to go on defense. He's been trained. He was trained in that Thibodeau, KG, that whole era, and just watching the Clippers have somebody other than DeAndre out there who if somebody beats somebody off the dribble, Baby slides over now to get in that guy's way. Clippers didn't have anybody like that. I think he's going to play 20, 25 minutes a game. I think he's going to play crunch time for them occasionally because there's going to be nights where you can't play DeAndre. There's going to be nights when they do hack-a-shack on him. There's going to be nights when Blake gets in foul trouble. And I just thought that was an under-the-radar move that I don't think people realize how bad the Clippers' backup bigs were. Like, when you're trying out Ryan Hollins and Mullins, and it was just ghastly. At least now the Big Baby can kind of hold the fort. Worst case scenario.
I agree. Look, I wrote a whole thing about Big Baby in that signing, and sometimes it's just really about who you replace. And if you're replacing Byron Mullins and Anton Jamison and Hedo Turkoglu at power forward, then you can be a big deal. And you talk to the people in Orlando, about why they bought him out. It's not because they didn't like him they think he's a really good defender. He competes hard. It was just, the right time
they needed
for
minutes.
Their franchise. Yeah, they needed minutes for their guys. And I agree. He's going to help. And you put him on a good team, he knows I don't get to take 15 mid-range jumpers tonight. That's not my role anymore.
Yep, he took one bad one in the Rockets game, and everybody kind of groaned. But the other part with him is he comes into the game, and it just gets the crowd going. I think he's important in home games. He's so much bigger in person than he looks on TV. And it's just like he came in, and my son just started laughing. He was like, "Who's that guy?" Like, he's just like, and he just kind of gives an energy to the crowd that I think the Clippers needed with their bench guys. But we didn't talk about Caron Butler. I assumed he was going to Miami. They had no idea Oklahoma City was going to get him. Am I wrong to think we will see him in multiple crunch times in round 3 and 4?
I'm skeptical.
Interesting. Why?
On the other hand, well, just because, Caron Butler has not been very good for several years. But the one thing Caron Butler can do is catch the ball and shoot instantly from the corners or from 20 feet on the wings and make shots.
What shot is open on Oklahoma City all the time?
Well, right, and we're talking now, Cephalosha is hurt. Jeremy Lamb is in a big slump and totally unproven. Perry Jones is unproven on a big stage. So there are opportunities there. And with Perkins out, Scott Brooks is going small more because he has to, and maybe he's going to discover 3 years after the rest of us that going small is something that really works well for Oklahoma City. And so there are opportunities there for Caron Butler. The thing is, the jab steps, the pump fakes, the spin moves into fadeaways, like you can't, it's gone. It's not allowed. It's like a Josh Smith 22-footer. It just cannot be allowed on your team when you have Kevin Durant or Russell Westbrook. And if he gets that, there are going to be chances for him to play in big minutes. I just, I have to see it. I have to see that he can still even credibly defend his position, but he can help them, and maybe that's why he didn't go to Miami. And I saw Pat Riley yesterday say, oh yeah, we don't, we have Rashard and Beasley and all these guys itching for opportunities. We don't need any of these buyout guys, and that's bogus. They wanted some of these guys and they couldn't get them.
Right, and also Caron Butler would have been great for them for the same reason. I watched him make that shot for 2 years in the Clippers. He stands in the corner. He has a really quick release, and he's really good at it. And he gets into trouble, as you said, when he thinks he's 2006 Caron Butler. But I think he's going to realize, I've said this before to you on the podcast, I feel like Jeremy Lamb had the best job in the world the last 4 months. And the fact that he's in a slump is amazing to me. All he does is shoot open jump shots. I want to come back in my next life as Jeremy Lamb. And Caron Butler now is going to be standing in that corner wide open over and over again, getting wide open threes, and I think he's going to make a lot of them. I think he's really going to help them.
It started, and again, we talk a lot about what a great coach Rick Carlisle is. That evolution for Caron Butler started in that season in Dallas when they won the title, and he got hurt late in the season. He was never a big corner three-point shooter, high volume, high accuracy at least, before that season, and they turned him into that player, and that's been his best strength ever since then. And, we'll see what happens. But by the way, I did want to say, we're talking about buyout guys and what the Clippers have done. If you had any idea, any doubt that Doc is running the Clippers in terms of personnel decisions, just look at the fact that they've signed every player who was good in the Eastern Conference 5 years ago at the end of their bench.
Right.
Doc remembers those Hedo Turkoglu point forward games from the 2009 playoffs.
He did. He went out and he got everybody who ever had a good game against the Celtics in the last 10 years. Hedo could not be more washed up. It's he had a reverse layup blocked by the bottom of the rim on Wednesday night, and the crowd was just he comes in now, the crowd gets bummed out. But, for them, it's going to depend on can they stay alive long enough for when Redick comes back. Is that going to be enough? I felt like Miami needed somebody because now you're putting all the pressure on Shane Battier to be able to spell LeBron for those 20 minutes a game or 15 or whatever against Paul George and Durant. Because there's nobody else on the roster who can guard those two guys, right?
And it was interesting, the first time they played Oklahoma City, Battier did not guard Durant at all. LeBron guarded Durant the whole game, and on the flip side, Oklahoma City used 3 different guys to guard LeBron. And the second time they played, Battier guarded LeBron, or Battier guarded Durant 2/3 of the game and was fantastic. And I don't know if it's just the All-Star break did him well or they're playing possum a little bit or just mixing it up. But it was interesting to see that. But you're right. Look, we know who Miami's break in case of emergency guy has been the last 2 playoffs. It's been Mike Miller, and he's gone. And you can tell me all you want about, we've got Rashard Lewis and Michael Beasley. I mean, look, those guys don't play in big games and have never played in big games. And we don't know if they're going to play at all in the playoffs.
You can't play Rashard Lewis against Durant. Caron Butler, who, as you said, the ship has sailed on him defensively to a large degree, is at least a big body who carries himself angrily and will have a couple tricks and, will muscle Durant and get competitive with him at least, which, now he's on Oklahoma City, so it doesn't matter. But I think that's a slight hole for Miami.
And the NBA is funny. I was talking about this with Amin Hellison of ESPN.com at Sloan, and he was saying, we were talking about Danny Granger and whether Danny Granger for Evan Turner was smart. And he was saying, I really like the threat of Danny Granger just standing there. I think defenses respect that. And I do think there's this effect of if you're a veteran and you're respected and you've done stuff in the NBA and current players have watched highlights of you doing stuff, there's no way to study this statistically, I don't think, but I think the league is 2 years slow in realizing, I don't have to guard that guy, he can't shoot anymore. I don't have to pay a lot of attention to him. I think there is that veteran aura that sticks to you for a while. Everyone knows I don't have to guard Evan Turner in the corner because he's never been a threat. Rarely has he been a threat from outside. But people still look at Danny Granger as a star. And maybe it's the same way for some of these other guys like that. Maybe it's, some of the guys like Butler. Maybe they look at Butler and say, oh my God, I got to run out to guard Caron Butler.
But at least with Butler, he's had a couple good games this year, and he can still make corner threes. Granger to me hasn't done anything in 2 years. You make a good point though about the veteran reputation versus the reality. I think the best example that I can remember is Sam Cassell in 2008. Remember that? It was like, oh, Sam Cassell, veteran presence for Rondo. Every time they put him in, it was like exploding a grenade on the court. He was so bad. And then and Doc was just kind of in a corner with it. Kept playing him, then finally stopped playing him, and that's when the team started playing well. But it was all reputation. He had been washed up for 2 years, you know, and I do think there is something to that. The aura, the past memory aura of players. I think Granger's shot.
Maybe and all the evidence we have suggests that Granger is not ready to contribute on a big stage like that. Maybe that's a future Sloan Conference study. And by the way, this is the epitome of why we talk every year about can the analytics and the sort of geekery make its way into the coaching and what happens on the court. We were supposed to talk about the Sloan Conference, and we didn't talk about the Sloan Conference at all.
Well, it seems like the Sloan's in the same position it was last year, right? Everybody agrees the stats are useful. Everybody agrees, you know, it's part of the bigger puzzle. You use the stats, you use the eye test, everybody uses all of these different things to evaluate players. The one thing that was a theme this year that I thought was interesting, Barnwell wrote about it on Friday, and I think it's a theme I'd love to see the Sloan talk about more is how to make all of these super complicated numbers and statistics easier to understand for people who aren't necessarily prone to wanting that information. And that, to me, is the next step of this whole revolution. How do you make the numbers understandable in a relatable way to people like my dad? And that's the part they haven't figured out yet. And maybe they never will.
I don't know if your dad matters as much as the coaches. But I think that...
my dad would disagree.
Well, no, it matters in terms of what happens at the NBA. Your dad matters very much. I think that process is happening, but and that goes back to, I mean, we can't. This is nerdy stuff, but I think it goes back to what kinds of people you hire, how much of your budget you're willing to put into making that, to getting good numbers and then translating them to. It can't just be two guys making $50,000 a year that don't know anything about basketball. And I think as NBA teams have sort of scrimped on some wings of their front office, that's going to have to change if you care. And there is something to the argument that, look, in the NBA, we need one of the 12 best players to win a title. What happens on the margins is on the margins. It's not worth investing in. But the margins matter once the level of competition becomes relatively equal. And that's when, in terms of signing free agents and figuring out who you should trade for, you can learn stuff from this. And I think we are in the process. If you look at some of the sort of contractors that get access to the SportView data and have relationship with teams, they're doing really good stuff. I mean, if you want to know what percentage of times on the pick and roll that, Portland, they're a bad example, New Orleans hedges hard or traps or blitzes or drops. I mean, you can find that in 2 seconds, and that's easily translatable to a coach. Yep. That's not advanced. That's a percentage, and it's expressed in basketball language. And if anything, I always say this, I feel like the word advanced has been sort of a disservice. I feel like words like advanced in analytics have hurt the sort of meshing of analytics with basketball because they intimidate people. And a lot of these numbers are not advanced at all. They're just like sub-algebra. They're not even algebra. They're just like defensive rebounding percentage. That's just a percentage. Points per possession is just a ratio. Like, this stuff is not that complicated, but for some reason it's just been very slow to leak into the discussion. But we're getting there. We're getting there. And even the SportsView stuff is going to be just huge. And the stuff like what center is great at protecting the rim, and really easy to understand numbers with things like that. What point guards are great at getting to the basket. I like that stuff. And there's always going to be a place for that. I wonder, it seems like we've kind of drifted. Gundy had an epic rant about that on our panel, but it is useless. What did he rant about? He just was like, I saw Paul George ran 130 miles this season. Of what possible use could that be to me goofy. As a coach? That is goofy. With some profanity sprinkled in now and then. He was the star of the Sloan Conference, it sounds like. Yeah, him and I missed this panel, but apparently Wick Grousbeck and Vivek Ranadive got into it a little bit in the ownership. Oh, yeah. People were texting me from inside the room saying, you got to get in here and hear what's happening. They were... Vivek, I haven't seen the transcript yet, but the quotes that I have seen, Vivek essentially, went at Wick for tanking, said you're tanking the season, you're not trying to win. And Wick first responded by saying, I think his exact quote was, Brad Stevens would light himself on fire to win a basketball game. So if we wanted to lose, we've hired the wrong guy. And then it went on a little bit, and I think Vivek repeated his tanking accusation, and Wick, the owner of the Celtics, by the way, if people don't know who that is, Wick went back at Vivek, who owns the Kings, and said, well, if we're tanking, what the hell have you guys been doing for like the last 10 years? And the room apparently like erupted with oohs and ahs.
Oh, that's great. Because the other thing with Wick is he's definitely, I like Wick, but he's definitely a little bit of a hothead. He takes that stuff personally when people say the Celtics don't want to win. You watched last night, that's not a team that's tanking. I don't think they're a good team, but they were trying to beat Indiana last night.
I was at that game. It was on Saturday. It was like everyone
Saturday. Sorry.
Yeah, everyone from the Sloan, like half the Sloan Conference was there, and I was at that game with my wife, and I had warned her. She's not a big NBA fan. I warned her. Indiana might be the best team in the league. This could get ugly, and she was like, "This is a great game.
Yeah,
this is awesome." Like the Celtics were in that all the way till the end. They were playing hard. They were getting good. Rondo looked a lot. He didn't shoot well, but he looked like Rondo. I mean, it's the first time I'd seen him in person since he came back, and he was doing Rondo things, getting in the lane, squeezing through tight spaces, wrapping crazy passes at crazy angles around to people. He looked fast. I think his conditioning is not there yet, but he looked good. I
agree. And with that said, I think they trade him this summer. It's just a gut feeling. I had no inside info. Me. I just think I think some of the stuff that happened last week, I know they made a much bigger deal in Boston about it than maybe they should have, but it seemed like a subtle post-trade deadline little dart by Rondo, like, oh, just for the record, don't think I'm totally happy. You know what I mean? It just felt a little calculated in my mind.
Would not surprise me at all. I mean, as I wrote last week, they put him out there. They're not shopping him. They're not shopping him. They're not putting him out there to anyone, but they're looking at teams that have the right asset packages and the right needs and saying, maybe he fits your team. Give us a lot of stuff. I mean, so it's not even close to being a situation where they want to trade him or are trying to trade him, but they're open to the possibility if they can get a great return for sure.
Well, what's interesting, you mentioned how the Sacramento-Boston owners going at each other. That was the most likely trade before the deadline, and that those teams talked for a while. I think there was a trade that made sense. It just came down to whether Sacramento wanted to roll the dice on could they trade for Rondo and then keep him. But the trade, I think,
which when you're Sacramento is a fair, given how bad they've been for so long. And Rondo, look, we can pick apart Rondo's game and whether he's a superstar, just an all-star, or whatever. That dude wants to win. I mean, and I think part of that is him, and part of that is he hasn't experienced much else other than his rookie year, other than being on a really good team that was in the championship picture. And that's when you get that almost in the door. I think it's hard to settle for prolonged agony.
I agree. Was there Carmelo buzz at all at Sloan or no?
There was more buzz about just what a disaster the Knicks are. There is the Carmelo, and look, this is not real. I want to make this clear. This is not real buzz. This is just like people in the NBA chattering buzz. But the idea that Melo might consider Miami is picking up steam.
Yes.
And again, I want to make clear, this isn't coming from Miami people. This isn't coming from Melo people. This is just speculation from people that work for the other 28 teams in the league thinking, as we finally approach this Rubicon where all three of the Miami guys can hit free agency, people are starting to wonder about Bosh, and people are starting to wonder about Melo, and people are starting to put those pieces together and combine that with New York. And I'm going to write about New York later this week. New York has not just been bad. They have been dead man walking, total humiliation, quit on the coach. And again, you know me, I'm Spock. I don't say stuff like this. They have been just a disaster. And when you reach that level of bad, that's when things that might have been unexpected when you were just sort of playing mediocre bad, that's when things can blow up.
I had them on Friday, and I had them on Sunday for TV, and I made this point. I'm going to make it again. I think Houston's a real possibility. They could get rid of Lynn and they can get rid of Ashik this summer and have the cap space to sign him. It's the Dwight Howard situation all over again, where he's leaving more money on the table with the team he's with. But the Houston state tax stuff makes up for it a little. You make a wink promise, we'll take care of you in year 5. The money's basically the same once you hash out all that other stuff. And if he wants to win and he's really, I'm all about winning, I want to win, I have to win, then that's the spot for him. Because now you're there with Harden and Dwight Howard. We know that Daryl's been on the record over and over again about putting together 5 All-Stars, or 3 All-Stars. And this would be the scenario, right? And I think that's a possibility. I'm with you on Miami. And I wonder what the public reaction would be to that, to all 4 of those guys saying, we're going to take $14 million a piece and we're going to kill everybody.
Well, see, I don't want you to be with me on Miami because I don't think that's going to happen. I'm just saying.
No, I'm with you on the buzz. There's been buzz.
Yeah, but I don't think it would be all 4 guys. I think Bosh would leave, which in that scenario, maybe it is all 4 guys. Maybe they all do that because everyone on Miami, but Cole, I think, is a free agent, so they can do that. But maybe one of the big 3 leaves so that everyone can get paid about what they should get paid. But then if it's Bosh, that raises obvious questions about who the hell the big guys on the team are going to be. But it would be fun to see Miami just go like, forget big guys. We're just going to win with like the best wing players in the league and see if you can guard us. But we'll see what happens. It's going to be an interesting summer.
Yeah, I like it. I don't know if there's a ton of truth in the Miami stuff, but I do think it's not impossible. And I think people would go bonkers. And I think he's out. I just think we're watching Dwight the Redux, where you had Dwight in L.A., who's miserable, and everybody's saying, no, he's not going to walk away from the money. He's not going away from the money. Oh, he walked away from the money. So it's going to happen again. You have to go. Zach Lowe, as always, a pleasure. We will read you all week on Grantland, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks for the time.
Always a pleasure.
So I get to sign off. Whoa.
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNRadio.com.
Peace out.
Gotta say, Golick, great call on grabbing Subway for lunch and getting guacamole on our subs.
Told you this new guac really amps up the flavor.
Yep, something adding up things can be great. Guacamole on your sub, a new co-host to replace you.
What was that?
Oh, no, nothing.
Subway now has deliciously rich new guacamole made from ripe Hass avocados with just a hint of garlic, onion, and jalapeno. Discover how new guacamole turns up the flavor on any of your freshly made favorites. Subway, eat fresh.